quarantined? Sorry, bad joke. Let's try again. Are you feeling a little too Jack Torrance this mega spring break? Nobody's gonna get that reference. All right, let's try something different. Hello, everyone. My name is Nick. I'm a student at Gonzaga Prep. I'd consider myself a film buff, even though I like everything I see. Anyways, in our times of boredom, who do we turn to? Netflix. My goal today is to highlight some of the best movies streaming on Netflix right now. All right, let's begin. But before we can begin, I have to go through a series of disclaimers. Disclaimer 1, there are a lot of disclaimers. Disclaimer 2, I know you can find this sort of stuff on your own, but 1, it's really hard to find quality content on Netflix these days just by browsing through, and 2, I'm hoping I can bring a little of my own experience as a high schooler into this list, as opposed to other lists you can find out there written by somebody else. Disclaimer 3, these are merely my suggestions to you. Please, check with your parents before watching anything. I wouldn't want to be responsible for showing you something incredibly violent, like The Muppets. It's a very violent movie, The Muppets. And the language, off the charts. I mean, most F-bombs in history, it's like number 1, The Wolf of Wall Street, number 2, The Muppets. Come on, man. Disclaimer 4, these are all films I myself recommend and liked, but just because I do so doesn't mean you will like them. You might not. So please don't get mad at me if you disliked one of my recommendations. As you know, trying new things is really terrible. We never would have gotten anywhere in the history of the world if we ever, tried new things. Disclaimer 5, I won't go into any sort of spoilers here, but for those of you who like to know absolutely nothing about a movie going into it, there should be a list of the films I cover in the description and the genres that they fall under. And disclaimer 6, as with all of us, it's a weird time right now. I'm not very technically proficient using iMovie, especially mobile, so I might not be able to get the fancy graphics that you've come to expect from the broadcasting network, but, hopefully this video is enough. Hopefully don't get bored of just me talking, because I probably can't do much else. In the studio, it's the ceiling of my house, everyone. But yeah, let's get right into it. So let's start with comedy, because that is a genre we could all use right now. First up, I'm going to recommend a Netflix original film, and that film is Dolomite Is My Name. This came out last year, and it stars Eddie Murphy as the real-life comedian, Rudy Ray Moore, who decides to make a movie despite having no experience or money, and it's really hilarious, but also kind of heartwarming. So if you're in the mood for something that'll kind of lighten the mood, I guess, this is really a great film to watch. It's got great performances. It's really funny. If you like any, movies about making movies, then I think this is a good one to watch, because it shows you how to kind of work around having a small budget and still have personality and have a fun movie, basically. My next recommendation is a true comedy classic. I tried to throw in, I know you guys are going to be hesitant, but I did try to throw in a couple classics here, because, come on, they're necessary viewing. And this one is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So, what many consider the best comedy of all time. It's on Netflix right now, so it's probably worth checking out. It is old, but I think it's aged very well. I don't think you're going to get bored by it. The whole thing moves really, really quickly. It features, the humor isn't very realistic. It's very silly, very absurdist, kind of surreal at times. But I think it's really worth a watch. I think it's one of those movies that everyone really should watch at least once in their life. And my last recommendation is the film Hot Rod, which is in my opinion, one of the most underrated comedies of the last several years. It features pretty much every type of comedy you can imagine. The premise itself is hilarious to me. It's about this kind of stunt man. He has like a motorcycle. He does a bunch of stunts, and he's trying to perform. He's not very good. Like, that's the catch. Is he always fails. He always hurts himself. But he's trying to perform this big, like, Evel Knievel stunt to raise money for his stepfather, who has heart disease or something, some problem, and they can't pay for the hospital bills or whatever. But he's doing this so that he can beat up his stepfather himself because he hates him so much. But despite that mean-spirited premise, I think it's really a heartwarming, feel-good movie. Just lots of different types of comedy. You can't really put this one under a shell. I've recommended it on this channel before, so there's that. It's really, I think it's one that you just have to watch. It's really short. But it's got silly humor, it's got, like wordplay, it's got a lot of surrealism, it's got everything you can imagine. So, my next genre is drama. The first film I'm going to recommend is the film Zodiac, which is very long, but I think it's really worth it. A little bit of a warning, it is about the real-life serial killer Zodiac, hence the name. So if that sort of thing kind of scares you or deters you, then don't watch it. But if you're interested, then I'd say it's really worth your time. It'll pull you in. It doesn't feel like 3 hours. And it's a great addicting way to spend your time. It's also very accurate. So if you're like, if you hate historical inaccuracies, then this director is famously like a perfectionist. So he researched everything painstakingly, and it's pretty great. Really suspenseful. At times very not scary, but tense, I guess I would say. And yeah, it's never boring. So yeah, check out Zodiac. Next one, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to recommend 2 movies, but they go really, really well together, and they're both on Netflix. They're both from the same director, that guy who fell asleep at the Oscars, at Eminem's rap at the Oscars, Martin Scorsese, one of the best directors of all time. These 2 films are Goodfellas and The Irishman. Both are films centered around the mob or gangsters or whatever, so if that interests you, watch them. If it doesn't, of course, don't. Because they're both really, really long, like 3 hours, 3+ hours maybe. But if that interests you, if you're interested in original like filmmaking, good soundtracks, the Irishman is a bit more dour, or the tone is a little bit darker than Goodfellas. But I think they're both really interesting, kind of unflinching looks at the mafia. They are very violent, so if that turns you off, don't watch them. And lastly, I'm going to recommend a classic, another film that I would say is pretty much required viewing, and that film is Rocky. This is probably the best underdog sports movie ever made. I can't think of one that even comes close, if I'm being honest. If you're like, boxing doesn't interest me, me neither. It's like 20 minutes of boxing, and the rest is all training montages and like his life and personal stuff. It is mostly a drama. It's not a sports movie, really. Yeah, I don't think any of the sequels are on Netflix, which is kind of unfortunate because I think they're a good like binge watch. But again, it's worth a watch. My next genre that I will cover is horror. Goes without saying. If you scare easily, don't watch any of these movies. Maybe one. There's one on here that's not really scary, but you'll see. My first recommendation is another older movie, and that is The Evil Dead. Be warned, this is really gory, so if you don't like that, really do stay away. I'm not over exaggerating. Like, very, very gory. Over the top, I would say, though. It's not like one of those. It's just not like a Saw movie where you watch it and you don't feel comfortable in your own skin or whatever. And the film has a very low budget, and it was made in the 80s, so it on the surface it doesn't look very good. I'll say that. You're gonna watch it and you're gonna see the first couple special effects, and you're gonna be like, "What is this is awful." But if you're willing to stick with it, and if you're willing to kind of pass over those bad special effects a little bit, I think you can really have a great time with this movie. It's a little cheesier than your typical horror movie. I didn't pick any like straight up horror movies for this. I picked ones that are kind of a little bit, each one is a little bit different. Because I think that horror has become really popular, and I think it's kind of interesting to expand your horizons even within one genre. So that's why I picked this film. Again, the sequels aren't on Netflix, which is unfortunate. TV show is, but kind of need to see the sequels to understand the TV show. If you don't like horror movies that rely on violence or blood or over-the-top jump scares, then check out The Ring. You may have seen this. It's definitely a little bit more common or general than my other films, which are a little bit more obscure. But I've talked to a few people who have kind of heard of it, and they know like the girl with the long hair, but they haven't seen it. And I think it's kind of gotten a bad reputation, and it's kind of, the sequels have kind of made it fall into like the paranormal activities, if you will, jump scare horror. But it really is, the first film is really interesting. It's basically plot. The whole movie is basically this journalist, uncovering the story that happened several years ago. And it's not scary, but it's unsettling. The cinematography is really good. The visuals, the set design and the costume design are all very unsettling. The story is really, really well fleshed out. And it's got a great ending. If you like sort of ambiguous endings, I'd say this is a great film to watch. If you like twist endings, it's a good film to watch. You might already know the twist just because of osmosis and pop culture, but if you don't know anything about The Ring, then definitely check it out. The next one, again, I'm going to cheat a little bit. This is more comedy than horror, but I think if you're a fan of horror movies, you'll appreciate this more than someone who doesn't. So, which is why I didn't put it in the comedy category. And that film is Tucker and Dale versus Evil. This film is really funny, but it has some good, not horror, but it has a lot of good, like, just sort of not jump scares, but like gore, and it's got a creepy villain. It's got a lot of horror elements in it that are like genuinely good, and it's got a lot of parody elements in it that are genuinely good. The characters are really likable, except for the villain, of course. And it just sort of turns the whole like conventional horror film on its head, and I really like that. It's very subversive. I think the less you know going into it, the more you'll like about it, because it is very much a surprise. Discovering what exactly is happening along the way is what really makes, I think, that movie enjoyable and entertaining. So, are you in the mood for some adrenaline fests? Well, look no further than my action recommendations. And my first one is kind of a tribute to the B-movie creature features of the past. So if you like monster movies, but you think some of the older ones are, they're in black and white, I don't really want to watch those, they're old, then watch Tremors. It's a really fun movie. It's got a lot of great action. It's got a lot of good suspense. And it is cheesy, but it knows it's cheesy, and it leans all the way into it. And it knows how to have a good time. The effects have held up really well, considering it came out in the early 90s. And the whole film revolves around these like worm creatures, these giant worm creatures that live underground. And they can sense the vibrations when you step on the ground. And when they sense it, they eat you. So it's basically like Jaws. It's like a shark, sort of, blood in the water. But with giant worm creatures in like a Midwest town, small town. And it is a blast. My next recommendation is also, it's a bit more, a little bit more of a kind of a tribute. And that film is The Mask of Zorro. Now, if you don't know who Zorro is, you might know him as the movie that Bruce Wayne's parents went to go see when, the inevitable happened, if you will. But before that, he was a novel character in the early 20s, and he was basically a superhero before superheroes were really popular and had even really been invented. And there have been like many adaptations of the character since, some better than others, of course. I would recommend this film, though, not if you like superheroes. More so if you like Indiana Jones, or if you like something like that, Romancing the Stone, whatever, adventure. This film is a blast. It's got a lot of great sets. It's got a lot of really well choreographed action, sword fights, whatever. It's got a lot of heart. It's got a good romance. It's got pretty much anything you can think of, that you want in your action movie. They tend to have a lot of those elements, but this one really does everything right and nothing feels forced. My last recommendation is a superhero film, actually. It's a bit more obscure. It's not a famous superhero, it's not Marvel or DC. But I think it's a film that's really worth a watch, and that film is Hellboy. The film is it has some effects that aren't great. I won't lie to you. You'll see it at first. You'll watch the first 10 minutes and you'll be like, is this it? But once you get into it, I think you'll really enjoy the characters. I think you'll really enjoy the story. And I think you'll enjoy the action, because there are some great special effects. There are some very bad special effects in this movie. It was made in 2004. You have to keep in mind. But it's got a really enjoyable story, very compelling. I think you'll really like it. My last genre that I'm going to go through is science fiction. And my first recommendation is the film Snowpiercer, which was directed by the amazing Bong Joon-ho, who, of course, won the Oscar this year for Parasite. Highly recommend that movie, by the way, but it's not on Netflix, unfortunately. This film features Chris Evans, who plays Captain America, as the lead. And it takes place in a post-apocalyptic future where the world is kind of frozen over. And all of humanity lives on this train that's like going around in a circle every year, just perpetually. And it's got a really interesting commentary on like classes and social classes, and it's got like kind of this microcosm where, the train represents kind of our world today, but in a smaller, contained area. And it's a really interesting film. Again, maybe it doesn't have the best effects. A couple scenes haven't aged very well. But I think it's really worth a watch. The second half is really clever and creative, and the first half is a nice, like, solid, kind of almost heistish feel to it. But it's very heavily science fiction. The next film I'm going to recommend is also kind of, required viewing for science fiction aficionados. And you might have seen it if you're a sci-fi fan. If you're not, then I really think you should watch it, because I think most people will really like this movie. And that movie is The Matrix. I mean, come on. It's got Keanu Reeves in it. You can't not watch it now. But no, this film, you've probably heard of it before. You might have seen, Red Pill, Blue Pill, that sort of thing. But I think it's really aged incredibly well. And you can tell how influential this movie was to films in general. Like when this came out in 1999, no one had ever seen these kind of effects, this kind of action like filmed this way before. It was very just big and important to the world of action filmmaking and whatnot. It also is a film that'll really get you thinking. Like if you want to watch this movie and just constantly question reality after you watch it, then this is the movie for you. Like I can't think of another movie that'll do that more than The Matrix. But it's got great action. And it's, again, I think it's aged really well. And my last film is going to be probably the toughest sell for you guys. And this isn't a movie that I think you'll enjoy so much as I think is kind of an important film to watch. So feel free to ignore this. Feel free to even skip over this part if you just sort of want to be entertained. But if you want to sort of watch a more challenging film, then check out Blade Runner, because the original is on Netflix right now. And it's going to be one of the most slow-paced science fiction films you'll see. It's not very fast-moving. And it really is very, very plot-focused. There's no real big action. There's like a chase scene in there, in the final battle, has some shooting and whatnot, but really it's very, very slow, kind of methodical, but it's some of the finest world building I've ever seen. Like, this is such a convincing future. This isn't Back to the Future Part 2. Like, this is believable. And it actually took place in 2019, which, obviously that part's not true, but I think, I could really see this kind of future happening, sometime. It's got some interesting social commentary. It's really well directed, excellent set design. If you're interested in filmmaking or just, being a film buff, being a bit more than a casual fan, then I really think you should watch this and take advantage of it while it's on Netflix. Because, it's not so frequently that one of the best films ever made is on Netflix. So that's my list. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you chuckled at a couple of my jokes. Again, I'm not very technically proficient at this sort of thing, so there might be some after effects, there might be some words at the bottom of the screen here, I don't know. But there's probably not going to be much. It's probably going to be like 20 minutes of me talking to the screen, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found some good recommendations. Thanks so much for watching and supporting my content while I'm doing my best filming with my iPad stuck at home, so thank you very much.